Have you ever wondered what sex during the Black Plague was like? Amidst the most fatal pandemic in human history, how did people handle bedroom issues during this time? Did the sex traditions change? Were they new sex rules? Thinking of sex during the Black Death sounds sick and twisted, but life goes on, as they say, even during an epidemic. People are still people, even when a ton of people are swept away. At least 75 million died during the epidemic. Engaging in physical relationships during the Black Plague was in many ways a lot like how it was during the rest of the Middle Ages. But the extreme conditions led to some extreme expressions of sexuality. The victims of the Black Death suffered from swollen and inflamed lymph nodes, called buboes, that appeared on their neck, groin, or armpits. These buboes oozed blood and pus, and were accompanied by fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, and severe aches and pains. Some people also developed black spots or patches on their skin, caused by bleeding under the skin. Many people died within a few days of showing symptoms, while others lingered on for a week or more. Some people had no symptoms at all and died suddenly without warning. Bedroom activity during the Black Plague was in some ways pretty wild, with some revelers deciding to hump the rest of their seemingly short lives away. But doctors at the time also told people to avoid overexerting themselves in the bedroom because they thought that bad air would reach them easier if they did. Watch on to learn more about what making love during the Black Plague was really like. Give us a thumbs up and follow for more kinky content like this. The Black Plague was a stressful time to be alive, for obvious reasons. One way to cope, according to historian David Herlihy in The Black Plague and the Transformation of the West, was by celebrating life in cemeteries. Group activities were one of the ways people celebrated life. At Avignon's Champfleur Cemetery, for example, things got so bad that a papal official had to threaten the fornicators and adulterers with excommunication for committing unseemly acts on the graves. Streetwalkers even took advantage of this desire by hanging out at cemeteries. It wasn't all fornication, revelers also dared to dance, fight, throw dice, and play other games among the graves as well. The Black Plague saw an increase in sanctioned prostitution. With a diminished workforce, cities started purchasing brothels as a source of new income. Brothels also helped to control hostility and unrest by giving men a sexual outlet. And with the high death rate, this prostitution boom actually helped to increase the population during this period. Medical logic at the time said that too much physical activity overheated the body, according to Joseph Patrick Burns' The Black Plague, and this allowed bad air to enter the body through one's pores, increasing the chances of catching the plague. Heavy breathing during the act might also lead to inhaling too much of that same bad air. A German physician even advised that all physical exertions and emotions of the mind, including running, jumping, jealousy, and promiscuity, should be totally avoided or risk catching the dreaded Black Plague. What could people do? They could spend their downtime relating tales and stories and with good music to delight their hearts. As the casualty toll of the plague increased, working girls benefited more and more, according to Jeffrey Richards. They began to enjoy a seller's market due to a general lack of labor in the era, leading to a general improvement of their conditions. Leah Lydia Otis wrote that as the Black Plague waned, there was a quantum leap in the arrangement of working girls. Municipally owned parlors were built, complete with royal safeguards. Otis did note, however, that the demand for girls began to wane at that time, as well. Joseph Patrick Burns wrote that many lawmakers at the time adopted the Christian belief that sin angered God, who expressed his divine wrath through plague, and they turned those beliefs into legislation. Many older moral laws essentially became just plain laws. This meant sexual immorality was heavily legislated. This sanitary legislation targeted sodomy and selling one's body in particular. In Florence, for example, working girls were kicked out of the city in the waning years of the Black Plague. When the industry re-emerged in the decades that followed, they were still forbidden to work on the streets. Certain establishments, however, were still allowed to legally operate. According to the Encyclopedia of Homosexuality, Volume 2, a vital urban subculture of homosexuals existed during the Black Plague. It wasn't until the Renaissance that more detailed records of the life and attitudes of homosexual men and women emerged. But this vital subculture was alive, despite only fleeting glimpses of it in the literature of the period. A few decades before the Black Plague, King Edward II of England was murdered, and centuries-old rumors say he was executed for homosexual activity. Mel Gibson's Braveheart received a lot of criticism for its negative portrayal of Edward. The belief that sexual immorality, such as sodomy, helped cause the Black Plague surely was another factor in keeping the subculture hidden during the period. So-called flagellants during the Black Plague were, according to Professor Mark Damon of Utah State University, professional self-torturers who went around whipping themselves for a fee in order to bring God's favor upon a community hoping to avert the bubonic plague. They were literal whipping boys that people employed to buy remission from sin. The church, of course, outlawed this behavior, but that didn't do much to stop the practice. There was also another group of lesser-known pseudo-flagellants that went from town to town performing physical acts in public for a fee. The church outlawed them as well. In domestic violence in medieval texts, Eve Salisbury, Georgiana Donovan, and Merrill Llewellyn Price wrote that incest in England actually increased during the Black Plague. Why? Simple arithmetic. The plague destroyed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population, making exogamy, marrying only outside their clan or community, improbable. The problem, Donovan wrote, wasn't keeping cousins from marrying, but instead, finding living cousins with whom one might preserve the patrimony. A lot of noble families died off during the plague years, meaning intrafamilial marriages greatly increased. Richard M. Smith wrote in Land, Kinship, and Life Cycle that the severity of fines for fornication in England increased as the severity of other legal fines generally decreased in the middle of the Black Plague period, 1349. Smith interpreted the high fines during this period as a punishment for acts that were seen as morally improper. The courts, essentially, decided to ramp up the punishment for immorality in response to the Black Plague. Blame the fornicators, basically. Smith did note, however, that attitudes about unseemly acts such as fornication, and thus the inclination to increase the fines for such acts, may have been changing even before the plague struck. Which one do you think was the weirdest norm during the Black Death? Drop your comment, support us by subscribing and liking for more content like this.